We all know goals are what matters in the NHL, but how many and how can the Oilers make more?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, on today's show, we're going to be talking all about goal scoring in the NHL. We're going to start in the outset, our big picture, our philosophical subject matter, which is typically how we start these big idea episodes of Locked On Oilers. Is we'll start with the philosophy, the mechanics, how you draw these conclusions, the process of putting together these conclusions, and then we'll go to the data. The second segment, we're going to look at it on a team level across the league. We're going to talk about goal scoring, percentage of goals that come at 5-on-5 versus on special teams. And then the third segment, we're going to talk about specifically to the Oilers, who scored their goals last year, how likely they are to be within the ballpark of what they scored last year, who's a candidate for positive regression, so somebody who maybe didn't score as much last year, having a little bit more of a role, maybe more opportunity, and how the new faces in Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson fit in to try and make that math work. So the reason I focused on goals for today, goals are probably the most transferable metric you can use to count year over year. Goals are relatively static for a player's career. For the most part, you take the average NHL player's career. The average NHL player plays about 4.5 seasons. You're likely going to find, and most players fall into this category, that's the way data works, over the more data you collect, the more likely you are to draw a definitive conclusion because you're going to get more average. And the more data you have access to, the more opportunities you're going to have to get a better, a deeper, a more meaningful understanding. The more data you have, the more detailed your conclusions can be. So when we talk about an NHL player's career, they're typically going to fall into something close to a career average in shooting percentage, in goals, and assists. Now, there are, of course, outliers. You know, Zach Hyman's 54-goal season this past year, that is an outlier. For his career, Zach Hyman's been a 25-goal type player for pretty much his entire career since he became a full-time regular. You can debate the merits of how much of that is him versus his supporting cast, whether in Toronto playing with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, or in Edmonton with McDavid, with Draisaitl, with Evan Bouchard, etc. But for the most part, we can draw a conclusion that Zach Hyman is a consistent 20-goal scorer at minimum. Now, because you've changed his environment and made it more offense-friendly and given him opportunities to shoot more, which we talked about a few weeks ago, that he had 100 more shots on goal this year than last year, and almost 150, 200 shots more than his last year in Toronto, which tells you because his role changed, he had a greater opportunity to capitalize on his skill set. So when you think about it, you want to try and understand what's going to carry over year. And that's how you can kind of project things going forward. Things like shooting percentage, they're pretty sticky year over year. That when a player is consistently a certain profile of player, they largely maintain that. Of course, there are outliers. There are heaters. You know, guys get hot. They go on a nice little run. They have some confidence. They feel a little bit better about their game, so they're more inclined to shoot. And that's kind of what you saw last year with Zach Hyman, where he had never been that volume of goal scorer in his life, probably dating back to the time he was like 12 or 13, where maybe as the best player on a team as a 13-year-old, he might have outscored his usual like that. But something like shooting percentage is sticky. Something like save percentage for a goalie is not. And I will tell you it's because of environment. When you think about a goalie, you have confidence, talent, and environment. Shooting, talent, confidence. Environment does matter as far as shooting percentage and a player's shooting ability, but for the most part, even a bad player that's a good shooter can still score goals on a bad team. You know, somebody like Connor Bedard is going to shoot 15% from the field next season as a Blackhawk, and he's going to look pretty convincingly good doing it. He's going to look like a really good hockey player. Shooting percentage will stick even if you are on a bad team. You can make your own offense. Somebody like Anthony Duclair, who's been a 20-goal guy on some bad teams like the Blackhawks, like the Sharks, he can maintain that because of his raw shooting talent. You put him on a better team where he doesn't have to create his own offense, he might be able to get a little bit more value out of his talent. And maybe his shooting percentage isn't higher, but because his team has the puck more, they get more shots on goal. And even if he has the same shooting percentage, if he has more total shots, same shooting percentage on more shots is more goals. That's the way you have to game it out and think about this. And I hate to get up on the perch and pontificate because this isn't how a lot of people think about hockey, but we have baseline understanding of some statistics that carry over year, that are sticky, that are translatable, that allow you to project and understand how good a player is. And for everybody who says, oh, well, but you don't work in the NHL, I'm telling you, NHL teams have projections. They have benchmarks. They have ideas as to how they can get more out of these guys. For some players, think about Zach Hyman. There was somebody in that Oilers front office, in their pro personnel department, scouts other teams around the league to keep tabs, to build profiles, to build portfolios on players so that come trade deadline and come free agency, they have ideas. And forward-thinking teams, well-structured teams, they are going to have a means of identifying traits and turning those traits into actual play. So somebody in that Oilers pro personnel department looked at Zach Hyman, they looked at his profile as a player, they looked at his forechecking, his cycling, his skating, and said, if we put him with a great playmaker, he's going to get to good areas of the ice. And if he gets to better areas of the ice, he's going to be able to score more consistently. And even if we can't count on him being a 35, 40, 50 goal guy ever again, we know at minimum we can get 20. We put him with McDavid, and we put him on a first line and a first power play, and we tell Connor, hey, this guy is really good. If you give him opportunities, he's going to convert them. And then they start building that symbiosis where they kind of have a feel for each other, where they don't even need to really have an idea in their mind, that McDavid can be free-flowing and do his thing. Hyman gets where he needs to get. And it's the same principle as the spot-up shooter in basketball, where the guy who hits 44, 45% of his corner threes, he's going to be in that corner waiting for the kick out. That somebody's going to drive to the basket, go to lay it in, and at the last second, dish it out wide, because that three from the corner that goes in 46% of the time is more valuable than the layup that goes in 53% of the time. And you have to think about it, gaming it out strategically. And that's why basketball is the way it is now, where it's so emphasized on high percentage shots, whether that be the corner three, which is the easiest three of the arc to make because it's the closest to the basket, while also not missing out on opportunities for easy twos. Those layups, those second chance opportunities, those tips, those are valuable too. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about goal scoring on a league-wide basis. It's summer. That means barbecues, the beach, hot dogs, baseball, and concerts. I am going to Yankees Blue Jays on Friday. Got my tickets. The only place I buy tickets from our friends over at Gametime, with some of the best ticket buying app features in the business. Things like zone deals, where you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. All-in pricing, where they show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, my personal favorite. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. If you're going to a baseball game, you want to get an idea of how far away you are from the field, if you can see the scoreboard, if you're not going to be able to see one of the corner outfielders. The lowest price guarantee. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And Gametime ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying baseball and concert tickets this summer with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, some things are translatable. They carry over year. You've heard me use the word sticky a few times in that when somebody plays a certain way, some styles are more replicable than others. And the reason you largely see teams stay in the same boat when it comes to those year-over-year transferable categories that kind of relatively hold stable, especially in hockey, is because star players do not change teams often. Think about this. You get drafted at 18 years old in the NHL, or 19 years old if you're an overager, you have a late birthday, whatever. For the most part, the vast majority of NHL players will not make more than $6 million a season until they turn 28 years old or 27 years old. You cannot become an unrestricted free agent until you are 27 years old or you have played 9 seasons of service time. So, with that in mind, you should think about it this way. Star players are what drive the boat. A star player in the NHL, they shoot 17, 18, 19%. The average NHL player shoots about 11%. And that's where we kind of get a rough idea of who's above average, who's below average. And then, because we have access to a player's entire career, we can start to kind of level it out and understand, okay, he's a career 14.7% shooter. This year, he shot 18%. Well, did he take fewer shots? Did he take more dangerous shots? And that's how you have to think about whether or not what a player does is sustainable year over year. And when we're talking about it from a team-wide perspective, one thing that I do find to be the case is that teams that rely on the power play to do scoring for that, to drive their scoring, that their calculus in winning hockey games comes from having an excellent an excellent power play or an elite penalty kill, and that mitigates some of their depth issues. We typically see, this is not always the case, but anecdotally, it does feel like teams that have elite power plays aren't always the best at 5-on-5. You go and look at team splits. The Avalanche, 75% of their goals at 5-on-5. The Oilers, 75%. The Lightning, who had the best power play in the regular season this year, Nikita Kucherov, also over that 100 assist threshold. He was at 73%. The Rangers were at 74%. And then you look at some of these other teams like Nashville, 76%, Vegas, 77%, Winnipeg, 81%, Pittsburgh, 82%. And when you compare teams head to head, when you think about them head to head, one of the defining factors always is who's got more stars. And we typically see teams that have superstar players have elite power plays. You think about the Rangers, you think about the Oilers, you think about the Avalanche. These teams that have those dominant power plays, it's largely in part because they have elite players. They have Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar and Artemi Panarin and Adam Fox and Nikita Kucherov and Victor Hedman and Steven Stamkos. Well, now Jake Gensel, but you get what I'm saying here. When a team has that as a trump card, it gives them an opportunity to play their star players more. I know we often talk about depth is what matters, but you get to a certain point in the NHL season, it's usually the second round of the playoffs, where depth, most teams are relatively even. You look at the Oilers versus, say, the Canucks, you could even make an argument the Canucks were deeper at forward than the Oilers were. You could make an argument the Oilers were not as deep on the back end as the Canucks were. But even though the Oilers power play did go cold in that series and the Canucks did do a good job against it, ultimately, the longer that series went on, The star players stepped up. The Oilers won the games where their power play was able to convert. And that's how a great team can kind of flex its muscles, if you will, to show off that, hey, you might be deeper than us. You might be better defensively. You might have a better coach, whatever. When push comes to shove, and it's our best players out there, 5-on-4, we're getting a goal. And that's the end of the conversation. There's not really a back and forth there. But then you start looking at a certain point. When you talk about goal scoring on a league-wide basis, you're going to have a certain, for the lack of a better word, there's a benchmark to get in. It's generally about 250 goals. 250 goals in the regular season will get you in the door of the postseason. That was the average this year, was about 250. If you want to go by median, it was 254. 254 goals was the threshold. The only team below that 250 goal threshold that was able to qualify for the playoffs were the Washington Capitals. If you go above that benchmark, every team except for the Devils and the Red Wings made the playoffs. The Red Wings and the Devils, of course, really strong offensive teams, atrocious goaltending, atrocious defense. Both of those teams really struggled in terms of defense, and because they did not have great goaltending situations, like we've talked about, it was a lot harder for them to hang around in games. When every game is 5-4, 6-5, you're playing guys without a lot of experience, it begins to weigh on you. The accumulation, that the ability for a team to clamp down one end, whether it's we're going to control the game offensively or control the game defensively. Something that is interesting about this conversation is the Florida Panthers, who won the Stanley Cup this past year, 265 total goals, 63 of those goals on the power play, 73% of their goals came at 5-on-5, which is on the low end for teams that qualified for the postseason. And part of the reason why Florida's high-end players are really strong in both aspects. They're really good offensively, really good defensively. Barkov, Tkachuk, really good two-way forwards. But neither of those guys is an incredible shooter. Neither of those guys profiles as a goal scorer. They just happen to score some goals. And when you think about it in that perspective, it does show you there is more than one way to be competitive, to be effective, to win games, to win a Stanley Cup in the NHL. Now, the Oilers' die is cast. The Oilers are not going to take away some of the skill they have to become more like the Hurricanes or the Panthers, or like the Flames were under Daryl Sutter, the Kings were under Daryl Sutter, where it's volume would be nice. Let's get more zone time. Let's put more pressure. Let's shoot less. That would be entirely be counterintuitive to the way this roster is constructed. If anything, like we're about to talk about, their additions in Arvidsson and Skinner are going to make them only more offensively inclined to play at a higher tempo, to try and score from further away, to put more pressure on goalies to make extraneous plays, to put more pressure on defense to be able to make plays. So we're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to tackle this from an Oilers perspective, talk about whose results last year were a little bit below, who could be better, who fits in for who as far as replacements, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around. Thank you to everybody who is hanging out on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. I love gaming this stuff out, okay? As you can tell by the enthusiasm I have when discussing this subject, I love trying to answer these questions. How many goals does it take to make the playoffs? About 250. How many of your goals should come on the power play? 73 to 74% is kind of that sweet spot where you're right on the line of being a good 5-on-5 team, but your power play is not a net negative. You know, the Penguins, if they had a league average power play last year, they're undoubtedly a playoff team over the Capitals. They very well could have been ahead of the Islanders in the standings last year if their power play, which was very talented, you know, a team that has Jake Gensel and Riley Smith and Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson and even someone like Brian Rust. With that pool of forwards, how you have a below average power play is mystifying. It is befuddling, and it is an important caveat. There is a certain threshold that even if you are a dominant 5-on-5 team like the Penguins were last year and the year before that, frankly, you do need that extra little bit of oomph. You need that little extra goal scoring punch, because in today's league, you're going to need at least 3 goals every night to win, a minimum of 3. You want to win consistently, your goal should be 4. You score 4 goals a night, you are going to win most nights in today's NHL. 4 goals is enough where even if you're not a great defensive team like the Oilers, you can make do. Your goalie can bail you out to some degree. Your forwards can buy you zone time, not make you play as much defense. We've talked about that a lot this offseason as far as reframing how the Oilers can approach their style of play. They do need to take some heat off of their defense, because their defense is not particularly well structured and it is not particularly talented once you get past that first pair. So I'm going to click over to my Oilers notes here and understand that I'm going to be talking very fast here. So Zach Hyman, 54 goals last year. His career average is 25. His career average shooting percentage, 13.7. His shooting percentage last year was 18.6. As we've talked about a lot, expect Zach Hyman to come down, not all the way down. He's not going to be 20, but expect him to be in the ballpark of 35 goals. Draisaitl last year, 41 goals. His career average is 38. His average shooting percentage is 18.2. His shooting percentage last year was 19.9. So right around there. Expect Draisaitl to flirt with 40 goals. McDavid below his career average of 37 with 32 last year. He shot a little bit lower than he does for his career last year. But you got to remember, he started out the year injured, missed about a week and a half or so of the season early on, came back, really dialed up the assists. Part of the reason Hyman's 54 goals are a thing is because McDavid was a little bit below his average. So expect whatever goals that go away from Hyman's ledger to end up in McDavid's. Last year, Evander Kane, his career average is 21.7. He finished with 24. He shot a little bit above his career average last year. Warren Fogle, well over his career average, even though he shot his career average 10%. 20 goals last year, 13 for his is an average season. Bouchard, not a big profile, so we have to see where he's going to settle out in his statistics, but 18 goals last year on 8.2% shooting. He's a 6.5% shooter for his career, so room there to come back down. Nugent-Hopkins, only 12 goals last year on 9% shooting. His career average is 19. His average shooting percentage is 12. There's room for positive regression there. Ryan McLeod, who's no longer with the team, his career high 11 goals last year on 11% shooting, a little bit above his career average of 10.7 goals, and shot a little bit lower than average. But the further you go down this list, the more variance there is. Can you bank on Matthias Ekholm getting 10 goals again? Probably not. Is Corey Perry going to be able to score more than 6 goals if he plays more than 38 games? Yeah, probably. Is Adam Henrique going to give you more than 6 goals? Yeah, he should. Is Dylan Holloway going to give you more than 6 goals? Yeah, he should. And then you get to Arvidsson and Skinner. Last year, Arvidsson only plays 15 games. He has 6 goals. For his career, he averages 18 goals per season on 11% shooting. So we're going to take away goals from Hyman, from Fogle, from McLeod, from the Oilers' overall categories. And then you can slide in Victor Arvidsson for conservatively 12 to 13 goals. You go over to Jeff Skinner. 24 goals last year. His career average is 25.5. 11.4% shooting last year. 11.2% shooting is his career average. So it's not hard to see where the Oilers are going to replace the lost goals. So you lose 20 from Fogle, 11 from McLeod, 2 from Sam Carrick, 1 from Vincent Desharnais, 1 from Adam Erne. That comes out to 35 goals, if my math is mathing correctly. They can replace 30 of those 35 goals just from Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner. And Victor Arvidsson didn't play a full season last year. Then you can bank on some positive regression for Dylan Holloway. You can bank on some more goals from Adam Henrique. You can probably bank on Hyman and McDavid trading some goals from their ledgers back and forth to each other. And very quickly, you see the Oilers are in a pretty good position to maintain their goal scoring. And your goal obviously isn't to score 1 million goals in the regular season. Your goal is to score goals in a repeatable way that is going to translate to playoff success. And at a certain point, the rush-based offense the Oilers live off of does need supplementation. You do need to be able to cycle. You do need offensive zone time. You do need to put pressure on the other team's defense solely, if anything else, so your team isn't playing as much defense. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. So if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you are watching over on YouTube, hi, hello, this is my face. Hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live. And before we get out of here, thanks for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Hunter Hodes and I will be on there tomorrow, Thursday. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insights on every team in the league. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.